am recording on a different laptop than I used last time, so hopefully it works. I think it will. All right, so we are just going to talk about chapter 1 today, media ethics. I love it. Okay, there's a lot. There is so much in this chapter, and we're actually going to use next week to review a lot of it as well. So just be mindful of that. Like, yes, of course you have your quizzes and stuff, but we're like going to do more with it as well. So please don't feel too overwhelmed. All right. Also, I wanted to let you know how awesome your comments were and how funny your videos were. And teams, thank you for checking in there. I will go through and grade that. Actually, I'm going to write that down. But I hope you enjoy this lecture, and I hope it kind of changes the way you see things, because we often get well, we speak about ethics as if it is morals and values. So we're going to differentiate some of that today. We're going to talk about different ethical philosophies. And that's the part that we're going to take into next week, is those ethical philosophies. There's a lot, and they're complex, and they're super helpful. And I hope you can kind of see as you go through this material that our culture determines a lot around what we think is valuable and about what we think should be included or in a decision-making process. So anyway, I'm going to go through the slides. I hope this is helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. Also, I'll try to be in the discussion a little bit more. I haven't been there as much. I was mostly on Teams this week. So anyway, just kind of get to this. Okay, I have not used this feature before. I'm really hoping that it works well. Okay, so we're talking about ethical decision making, and your key words are decision making. Sometimes when we think of ethics, like I said, we think of it in terms of morals or values, and it is not that thing. It is a decision making process. So we'll get into more details along those lines. So by the end of the chapter, or end of this lecture, you should be able to recognize professional ethics in journalism and strategic communication. Now remember, strategic communication is marketing, advertising, public relations. We now know they're basically one and the same, and that has evolved with our technology. They used to be distinctly different. You've probably learned all about that already. We're going to talk about working with an ethical decision-making model, and I'm going to teach you 6, 7 today. So it's a lot, which is why we're taking next week with this as well. I also want you to be able to identify and use the philosophical principles in your professional setting. So we want to look at practical applications, which is why we do so much casework in this class. And take them into the future. And if you're working now in this kind of discipline in this industry, hopefully you've had experience with this already, and you can share that experience with us, or of course you will definitely have it in the future. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this. Ethics versus morals is kind of our most important place to start, because we really need to define what is what. That way we don't get confused. So if you think about it in terms of this, hopefully it will help. Ethics is this point right here, where we make this decision on whether we need to go left or right. Ethics is decision making. It's the things that we take into account when we're making decisions. So if you think of it in terms of a verb almost, even though it is a noun, it'll make more sense. Morals are the things that we do take into account, okay? So the ethics is the process, where the morals are the things that we're taking into account. So I just symbolize that with love, or let's say compassion is one of your primary morals, It's something that is central to who you are. It's really important to you, and you're in a really, really difficult situation and you're trying to figure out like what you need to do. Compassion would be something that you would keep at the forefront, that you would prioritize in the decision making, in the ethical decision making, to make sure that you're making a decision that will, well, it depends like on what strategy you use, but that will be a positive experience for as many people involved as possible. Okay, so here's some definitions. So ethics is about like what duties do I have and to whom do I owe them? Okay, who's responsible for what and when and why? Okay, that's ethics. Morals are values, like what values are reflected by the duties that I've assumed. Okay, so let's say I'm a mother. Most of my children are adults. They're young adults. So I value them, and I value them learning and going through their own kind of faith journey. And so what that means is I am going to choose not to say certain things about decisions that they make because I believe that they should have they should go through their own journey. So I don't know if that's making sense or if it feels way too abstract, but hopefully as we go through the process, it will make more sense. Okay, so what we're doing is we're distinguishing between ethics, which is a rational process. It's a logic form, founded on certain agreed on principles, and morals are in the realm of religion. So faith is important to me as a value, okay? And that's why I think they should have their own faith journey, but that means I'm going to be making decisions, these decisions all the time between left and right on how to interact with them because faith is such an important value to me. I hope this is making sense. It's a very, very abstract idea and way to look at the world. Okay, so ethical decisions are when moral systems are in conflict. Okay, so often we think of ethics as like good and bad. Do I make a decision between something positive or negative? And that's never the case. Ethics come into play when we're making a decision between positive and positive or negative and negative. So hopefully that will help too with the moral thing. So let's say I'm in a situation where I feel like, okay, I'm so sorry. I am thinking of so many religious contexts, but let me think of something else. Okay, let's say I'm at work and I ran out of printer paper at home and I need to print some stuff out. So I tried to decide, like, I don't believe in stealing, but I need printer paper. I'm only going to take a few, right? So I'm going to take some from the workroom, let's say. Okay, so that decision between like, I really need to print this out for my class. I can only print it out at home because it's the end of the workday, but I don't have any printer paper. So I'm doing good and good, right? My good is that I'm still working. My good is that I'm trying to take care of my students. But the values and the morals that are in conflict are work and duty to my students and not stealing paper from some, not taking paper I did not pay for, right? That's not part of my job description nor a way that I'm compensated. So hopefully you can kind of see like we have these like morals that are in conflict around what to do in that situation. So ethics is less about this conflict between right and wrong. It's a conflict between equally compelling or equally unattractive alternatives and the choices that must be made between them. These are forced choices almost always, and they're almost always urgent choices. So the more ethical models that we have and we can apply, the better we are in those moments of distress where something has to be done, okay? I've taught this class so many times, sorry, I'm like thinking of a bazillion scenarios where that might be the case. Okay, so making ethical decisions then is a dilemma of dilemmas, right? Resolving dilemmas is the business of ethics, and that's part of the reason I love it so much. I enjoy conflict. not in a way that hurts people, but in this like deeply philosophical way where you really have to grapple with what matters most. And that is what ethics is. Okay, so ethics is a set of tools. It's not a definitive answer. And so if we're getting into the realm of definitive answers, then we're not really taking into account those two things that are pulling against each other. Okay, it's more than a set of rules, and that's something else that you need to take into account. Sets of rules tend to come with morality, and that, like it said in the definition, tends to be the work of religion, not necessarily the work of communication professionals trying to make an ethical decision. They can overlap for sure, but they are kind of distinctly different realms. Okay, so it's skill set, it's analytical models, it's vocabulary, and it's insight to help you make and justify these ethical decisions. Oh, let me go back one. Okay, so here's a word about ethics 2 millennia later, okay? And we're talking about, did I skip 2? Let me go back. Yes, I did. Okay, so here we're talking about Plato and the Greeks, the sophists. This is where this idea of ethics starts to emerge, at least that we have recorded. Okay, the concept of ethics comes from the Greeks, who divided the philosophical world into separate disciplines. So, aesthetics, which is the study of beauty and how a person can analyze beauty, relying on their subjective evaluations. So, what is beautiful to you might not be beautiful to me. I was looking at some art this morning and I was thinking, I wonder if this is beautiful to me only, like obviously not only, but like to me, but would it be beautiful to the other people in my household? That is aesthetics. Okay, epistemology is the study of knowing. So this is a debate about what constitutes learning and what is knowable. Like, is knowing that there is a God knowable? Okay, people have been debating that now for centuries upon centuries. That's epistemology. Okay, can we know? Um, how can we know what makes a good marriage? I'm also teaching a family communication class, right? How can we know that? Like, what do we need to take into account? What we can learn and what is knowable? Like, can we define love? Can love be defined? Can happiness or joy be defined? All of these things kind of come into play when we're looking at epistemology. And then ethics is a study of what is good for both the individual and society. So I want to underscore that we live in a hyper individualistic culture at this time, which means individual rights are the primary priority in decision making. But we need to remember that ethics as a whole is a study of what is good, both for the individual and for society, the community matters. The community is made up of individuals, and therefore we have to take that into account as well. Okay, just more about the Greeks. I'm just going to read the slide here. 2 millennia later, ethics has come to mean learning to make rational decisions among an array of choices, all of which may be morally justifiable, but some more than others. Okay, so what we're doing when we're dealing with rationality is we're dealing with logic. And when I say logic, I mean that in the terms of like a math problem. Like when we have a math formula, we know like how to get to the answer. Rationality is like the logical, the logos formula to help us get to an answer in an ethical decision-making scenario. Just to define the word, rationality is the key. The Greeks believed, and modern philosophers affirm, that people should be able to expand their own ethical decisions and that acting ethically could be shown as a rational decision. Okay, so even though we're dealing with subjective experiences, we still should be able to put it in some type of formula and it would make sense. Therefore, it would be a rational decision. Okay, so we're going to start getting into who's who and these different decision-making models. When I taught this class before, we used a different book where we spent a whole semester going through the models. And they don't really do that. This book doesn't do that. The authors don't. They just like front load all the information, overwhelm you, and then you apply it as we go through class. I hope you see that this is worth knowing. These are formulas, if you will, worth memorizing. So we're going to start with Cecilia Bach's model. Cecilia Bach is a Danish philosopher, and she was one of the few people who actually spoke to media and the ethics around media. And so in every media ethics class, you will learn about Cecilia Bach first, because she's the woman, you know, she's the like go-to for this. Okay, so she has two premises. One, we must have empathy for the people involved in ethical decisions. Two, that maintaining social trust is a fundamental goal. Usually when we're dealing with journalism or strategic communication, we are in a scenario where we are representing an organization in one case, or where we're representing voices that may not be heard in the other case. That means we're dealing with communities and communities that interact with each other, and various stakeholders that have concern and investment in these communities. Therefore, we must have empathy for everyone involved, and we must have social trust. And if we violate one of those, then we've made an unethical decision. Okay, there's way more to this. All right, so she has 3 steps that she believes. Okay, so this is our first formula for making ethical decisions in a media context. Okay, first, you consult your own conscience about the rightness of an action. Cecilia believed, Dr. Bach believed, that your intuition matters, and we need to be quiet enough internally to be able to know the rightness of an action. That's unique, right? That's a unique approach, but critical, okay? So the question you could ask yourself is, how do I feel about this action? Okay, I'm going to give you a case that I don't believe it's in this book, but it's you get to choose the cases you review. So I'm going to talk to you about a case where it is not required reading, but it's one of the most fascinating stories. So there was a journalist, a photojournalist in New York City. He was trying to, it was at the like, it was, I'm like fumbling my words, excuse me. It was in a situation where they were trying to advance photojournalism, and he was among the best. He ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize for this scenario. So I'll tell you what the scenario was. He's walking down the street, he hears fire trucks, and he's like, okay, I'm going. So he goes and he sees that there is an apartment building that's on fire, and the bottom half is just, it is flames, and the top half people are still there. And so he sees a young woman. They later find out she's 19 years old, and she is caring for a 2-year-old. Now, they believe she was her sister, not the mother of the baby. And so she was in this very dangerous situation, trying to decide if she should jump down or be burned with the baby. So she decides to throw the baby, and then she jumps. So, okay, so here's the photojournalist, right? So he takes pictures of everything. In photojournalism, there's a saying that's like, you shoot first, and then decide later whether or not you're going to keep the photo. That is an ethical decision, okay? So he takes all of these photos, just doesn't even think, goes through, develops them, and realizes that he has caught her mid-fall. She doesn't survive. The baby does. The baby like bounces and lives on. And so then there's this question of like, do we share the photo of this woman falling from this apartment building with the rest of the community? He decides yes, because landlords were not taking good care of the apartment buildings that they owned. And so he felt like he needed to do this, okay? So the second piece of this, seek expert advice for alternatives to the action, okay, to the act creating the ethical problem. So is there another professionally acceptable way to achieve the same goal that doesn't raise this like controversial issue? In this case, in journalism at the time, the editor, the photo editor, and the newspaper editor would have been involved in the decision-making process about which photos to show with that apartment that was on fire. Okay, so there would have been others involved in that process. If possible, this is number 3, conduct a public discussion with the parties directly and indirectly involving the dispute. So how will others respond to the proposed act? So do we want to show this video with the possibility that there will be copycats if the fires in apartment buildings continue to happen? Yes or no, like how will the community respond? There's a lot of controversy around this, and I wish we were in a face-to-face class because we could talk about all kinds of scenarios that happen in our own communities that initially you think are a good idea, but the community doesn't react well. So I'm going to give you one example of this. I used to live in Alpine School District. I'll just say that. I won't tell you exactly where I lived. At the time, Lone Peak High School had the highest suicide rate in the country. What they found is when they would share information about a suicide, copycats would increase quite a bit. And so they just stopped. They stopped sharing the information. Police reports were kind of kept as secret, classified, probably a better word. And they would ask people not to post things on social media. And then all of a sudden they just saw this sharp decrease in suicide rates at that high school. That would be a process where do we share, do we not share? We want to celebrate their life, so we share thinking that others will be like, oh, what a beautiful, what a beautiful life, we're all important, and that won't affect any further actions, but then we find it does. There are loads school shootings, there's loads of scenarios where this is the case. So I'm sure that you are aware of some as well. Okay. So that's Cecilia Bach's model. Remember, she's the one person who spoke to what do we do in an ethical situation, specifically for media. Now, I'm going to give you 6 more scenarios, kind of formulas, if you will, as we said earlier. So Aristotle had a formula as well. He called it the golden mean. And next week, I'm going to go into a ton more details about these. I will also be giving you readings that are not in our book, just so you have that on your radar. Okay, so the golden mean was a moral virtue in a middle state determined by practical wisdom. Okay, super cool. What does that mean? So Aristotle believed that we make decisions on a spectrum. Okay, so maybe over here is bravery and over here is cowardice. And he said, in order for us to be able to make wise ethical decisions, we want to find something that's somewhere in the middle, and that's called the golden mean. Again, we'll talk about this in much more detail next week. Okay, Confucius is another one. He believed in self-cultivation. So through self-cultivation, one is shaped and transformed by internalizing the social values through accumulative learning and repeated practices. Okay, how does this apply to media? Because it seems very much about the individual. But if we think about it in terms of the building on fire, the apartment building on fire, let's say our primary value is safety. So then we want people to know how many apartments are going up in flames. We want people to be safe. And therefore, because that's our social value, what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that information as often as possible to make sure that people are learning that they need to take care of their apartment building so they don't start on fire. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. All right, again, we're going to go over more next week. Okay, Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. So this is the idea that you act on the maxim which you will to become universal law. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay, I don't know if you follow politics at all, Usually my students don't. I do because I'm a super nerd. But one of the things that is a concern is Project 2025. I hope you have had some frame of reference for it. If you don't, go search it up on Instagram Reels. You will find all kinds of crazy stuff. So Project 2025 is a categorical imperative. What they're doing is they're saying we are going to enact universal laws, and they will, in our country, and they will determine how everyone behaves and what they believe. Okay, this is often the case in religions. So if you need an example where that kind of makes more sense, religion is a place for that. Another example would be like the Caliphate state. So that is an Islamic state that believes that Islam is the primary religion and that the rules of Islam that are outlined in the Quran are the rule of law, and therefore everyone must live by this rule of law. So that is another example of this universal law. We do this much more than we might realize. So I'm going to just use another example that hopefully is more relatable to you. Your grades. Why do grades even matter? Have you ever thought about that? Like, who cares if you get an F or an A? Who cares, right? But you do care because your grades have become a universal law. It's part of the narrative in the education system. And so therefore you must get a good grade. See, the universal law, everyone must get a good grade. Okay. All right, next one. John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. This is the water in which we swim, okay? And what I mean by that is this is the culture in which we live. What decision can we make that will seek the greatest happiness for the greatest number? So if there is a minority that does not experience happiness, it doesn't matter because we're just trying to make sure that most people. So in politics, we call this the majority rule. Okay, so that's utilitarianism. It is, we are steeped in it in the United States. It is like the underlying assumption in which we live. Okay, so that's another one. Okay, again, remember, this is overwhelming. This is a lot. We're going to cover this more next week. All right. W.D. Ross, he was kind of like Cecilia Bach. He has written about media ethics specifically. He's a very fascinating man and has some really, really cool ways to make really difficult decisions. Okay, so he has this theory of value, the pluralistic, theory of value. More than one ethical value often simultaneously competes for preeminence in our ethical decision making. So we must distinguish between what the right and the good is. So what does that mean? That means that we need to know what our values are and we need to know what is in conflict. Okay, what is in conflict? All right, here's an example. This is the first one that came to me, so just bear with me. But one example is, like I said, we live in a hyper individualistic culture, which means we talk a lot about pursuing your dreams and your passions and your possibilities. Okay, but we also, in this particular region, live in a culture that very much promotes marriage. And so when you get married to someone, then you need to take into account their dreams, their passions, their possibilities. Okay, so you got to figure out then who, how can I say this? How to make them both work simultaneously. That is right and good. That those are the simultaneously competing values. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Then this is the last one. This is Carol Gilligan. I think she's super fast. The story around this is super fascinating. Okay, so she says that, and they call this in the textbook. I think they call this the feminist ethics of care. I don't know why they don't really give her credit, but she's the one that developed it. So what this means is that more than one ethical value. Wait, that's wrong. Oh, okay. That makes me crazy. You guys, that's terrible. I am so sorry. I will go through and I will fix that. And then I will re-upload it. I'll tell you, the ethics of care is basically based off of compassion. So here's the story behind it. There was a developmental psychologist, I think it was in the 1960s, who was watching how little kids developed and how they put themselves first and they have to go through this process of learning how to share. But Carol noticed that this was happening primarily with little boys, and the little girls that were in the scenario were not being taken into account. So when they looked at the little girls, what they noticed is that the little girls, of course, this is not all of them, this is a generalization, that they were more inclined to take care of the little kids around them. They were just almost innately nurturing. And so the ethics of care is this idea that we innately nurture, we innately show compassion. So in a media scenario, what we would be asking is, what is the most compassionate thing that we could do in this scenario? Okay. You guys, I'm so embarrassed by that. I'm so sorry. I will go in and fix it. Okay. The science of ethics. As people have become drawn to ethics, they seek the answer, right? To an ethical dilemma in the same way they seek the answer in science. So if you think about it, we're kind of going through our own scientific method. We're kind of going through this pattern to be able to figure out what it is that needs to be done. Okay? The vagaries of ethical choice, as contrasted with the seeming certainty of scientific knowledge, casts an unfair light on ethics. So basically, what this is saying is because there is subjectivity, it can be argued that ethics don't matter in that way because there's not the enormous data sets, that it's subjective and it's logic based instead. And so we're going to argue that not really. Okay. So if you look at it's the fourth bullet point or the second bullet, sorry, excuse me, the third one or the second, indented one, it says new moral thinking has emerged, but such work tends to build on rather than radically alter the moral theory that has gone before. So most of the moral theories that we deal with, like the ones I just explained to you, they've been around for a super long time, and we're adding to what people have already thought up. And it's rare that we actually uncover some new approaches, although next week I'm going to expose you to some other ethical models. You guys, I hope that helps. I hope that you learned something new from this. Only 30 minutes, probably good because I sound like I don't even know what. All right, have a good week, and I will be interacting with you more later.